Let's talk some college football. This is going to be the week 1 recap. We're going to talk about some of the big matchups, the surprises, the disappointments, and we're going to kick it off with Clemson versus Georgia. I'll be honest, this game went exactly how I expected it to. A little slow at the start, but then in the second half, just complete domination from Georgia. I mean, Clemson only put up 188 total yards. Clemson couldn't get anything going offensively, and once Georgia settled in and figured it out, they put up 28 points in the second half, onward to an easy 34-3 victory. And like I said, this is exactly what I expected. I think, honestly, this is exactly what a lot of people expected. Georgia is the clear-cut number 1 team in the country coming into this year and after week 1. This is going to be an extremely tough schedule for Georgia. Obviously, the SEC just overall is extremely tough, adding Texas and Oklahoma. They go to Bama. I believe it's week 5. That's going to be obviously extremely tough. They go to Texas. That's going to be extremely tough. Then they go to Ole Miss as well. They have Tennessee, and they also have Georgia Tech at the end of the year, who is now ranked. So overall, tough schedule, but if anybody can go undefeated with that schedule, it's obviously Georgia. So they are definitely my favorite to win the SEC, definitely my favorite to win the national championship. Clemson has clearly dropped off the past few years from that top tier with, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State. Are they still a good team? Absolutely. Are they ACC contenders? Absolutely. Are they playoff contenders? Absolutely, because it's a 12-team playoff, so they're definitely playoff contenders. Are they national championship contenders? No, they are not. They are slowly becoming more and more like Iowa by the second, dude. Elite defense, absolutely elite defense. I mean, they're going to be one of the top defenses in the country. They're going to run through the ACC for the most part. There's only going to be a few teams on their schedule that can challenge them, to be honest. But offensively, they are abysmal. They can't move the football. They can't throw it downfield. There's no explosive plays. It's just pitiful to watch. They were 4 for 13 on third down against Georgia. Like I said, only 188 total yards. And ever since they lost Trevor Lawrence, it's just been a completely different story with Clemson. I was listening to the Joel Klatt show, and I think he had a fantastic comparison. He compared the Clemson program with the Texas program from 10, 15 years ago. Texas was riding high. They won a national championship with Vince Young, got to the national championship with Colt McCoy, had 2 back-to-back elite quarterbacks. Then they lost Colt McCoy. They thought they had the answer at quarterback, and they clearly did not. And then while they were still good, they weren't good enough, right? And I think that Clemson is very, very similar. Obviously, you had Deshaun Watson, you had Trevor Lawrence, you won a couple natties. They were elite for 7, 8 years. And now, although they are good, they are not elite. They are not national championship contenders. DJ Uiagalelei was not the answer. Cade Klubnik is not the answer. Unless Dabo starts taking the transfer portal seriously, as well as NIL, but especially the transfer portal, I think he is going to struggle. You can't ignore those 2 things and expect to compete for a national championship. Until the offense improves, they are closer to Iowa than they are to Georgia, and I think that was obvious with this opening game against the Bulldogs. 34-3 win for Georgia. Again, Georgia's my clear-cut number 1 team. Clemson is a potential playoff team, but not a national championship team. Next, we have USC LSU, which might have been my favorite game of week 1. Super exciting game, but oh my goodness, does USC finally have a defense? Does Lincoln Riley finally have a defense? Because let me tell you right now, if Lincoln Riley finally has a defense, they are easily a playoff team. And I'm not kidding this is not an exaggeration. They are potentially a national championship team. Every single year, Lincoln Riley puts out an elite offense that can go beat any single team in the country. The problem is his defense has always been bad, not mid, bad. And last year it hit the lowest point, rock bottom. He finally got rid of Alex Grinch, and immediately week 1 of the following year, he holds LSU to 20 points in the opening game. If you told me that USC was only going to score 27 points in this football game, I would have said they lose by at least 2 scores. New defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn, absolute masterclass job in this game. Miller Moss threw for 378 yards. Nussmeier for LSU threw for 308. Both teams, I think, are very, very good. Like I just said, USC, I think, is a legit national championship contender, assuming this defense keeps at this level. LSU, it's going to be tough. They needed this win. I think this is their 5th straight week 1 loss. Brian Kelly has issues winning those big games, but I think LSU is still going to be a very good team. But like I said, this was one they needed to get into that playoff because they have such a tough SEC schedule up ahead. But in my opinion, these are easily 2 top 15 teams. LSU is honestly potentially a top. They might still get into the playoff depending obviously how they finish the year. They need to make sure they don't slip up against a team like UCLA, but then they got 3 big games: Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma. They also have at A&M. They need to make sure they win all of those other ones like UCLA, South Carolina, Florida, Vandy. They need to get all of those wins for sure. If they were able to beat one of those 3 ranked teams I mentioned, Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma, and they're sitting at 9-3, and you only have 2 conference losses, one, there's a chance you get into that conference championship game. But even if you don't, 9-3 with that resume, you are still a fringe playoff team with this 12-team playoff. Unfortunate news for them, though. John Emery is out for the year with an ACL injury. That's obviously their starting running back, so massive blow. USC's obviously in the Big Ten this year. That obviously makes no sense geographically, but they play at Michigan here in a few weeks. They play Penn State and they play Notre Dame at the end of the year. Those are their 3 biggest games. They obviously just beat LSU. If you can finish 10-2, you're probably a playoff team. Right now, I'm probably picking them over Michigan. They get Penn State at home, so I would probably like them in that game as well. Notre Dame will be interesting to see how well they play out this year, but I don't know, dude. USC could legitimately go undefeated. They don't have Ohio State. They don't have Oregon. In some ways, a favorable schedule for USC. Still not easy, but I'm telling you, dude, if they have a defense, which it looks like they do, not only are they a playoff team, they're a legitimate national championship contender. Next, we have Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Low-scoring game, defensive battle, honestly exactly what we expected. However, I did think A&M was going to win this one simply because it's week 1 and you're at home. But Notre Dame definitely impressed me. Their defense looks elite, but we'll definitely have to see more on the offensive side of the ball. That big play, explosive play potential didn't look like it was exactly there. Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard, who transferred from Duke, he definitely has poise. He has experience, which is very, very good. He can run the ball, which fits their offense well. The only issue is it just felt like his deep ball, the deep ball, the big play explosiveness, that potential didn't really feel like it was there. Texas A&M, on the other hand, offense looked pretty pathetic. Connor Weigman couldn't really get anything going the whole game. Obviously, they have new head coach Mike Elko, who also came over from Duke. I am a believer in him. I think he's going to be a good fit here at A&M. Obviously, you just got to give him some time. You know, he's not going to just completely fix this thing overnight. But my thought process is basically whichever team won this game was going to be slightly overrated. Notre Dame is up to number 5 in the polls. I don't think Notre Dame's probably the 5th best team in the country. Do I think they're good? Yes. Do I think they're a playoff team? Probably, especially with this schedule. I mean, they only have 3 more ranked opponents currently, and they are number 22 Louisville, who they get at home, number 23 Georgia Tech, who they get at home. I think there's a good chance both of those teams aren't ranked here in, a few weeks. And then they finish the year with obviously the big game, USC. They do have Florida State as well. We're going to talk about FSU here in a second. But obviously that biggest game is USC. If they go 11-1, they're probably in the playoff. Obviously, they can't get a top 4 spot since they do not have a conference championship. Everybody knows that now. But I think it'll be basically almost impossible for Notre Dame not to get into the playoff. Miami at Florida. What a great first game from the Hurricanes and for Cristobal. There's really not too much to say about this game. Miami is just clearly the better team, whether that means Miami is really freaking good or Florida really sucks, or a mixture of both. It was just complete domination from Miami. Cam Ward is an absolute baller. I don't think a lot of people even knew how good he was because they didn't watch Washington State. I mean, I remember him back when he was at Incarnate Word before he transferred to Washington State, and that was a massive get for Washington State. Obviously a massive get here for Miami. He threw a pick early in the game and bounced back marvelously and led them to a 41-17 victory in the Swamp. Here are the 2 big talking points, I think, for this game. It's basically just looking at both teams' schedules. You look at Florida's, they are screwed. They are absolutely screwed. They legitimately might go 1-11. Their next game is against Samford. I think that's their one guaranteed win. After that, they don't play. They only play power teams from here on out after Samford next week. So they play Samford, then they have A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. That is legitimately one of the hardest schedules ever, maybe the hardest schedule ever. And that stretch of Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and then at Florida State. Now, Florida State, like I said, we're going to talk about them. They don't look that good. But, I mean, like, I think best case scenario, they get 3, maybe 4 wins. And they, like I said, they literally might go 1-11. Now, on the flip side, Miami, obviously big win for them. But, dude, their schedule is legitimately one of the easiest schedules in the country. They only play 2 more ranked opponents currently, Louisville and Georgia Tech. Florida State, they play as well. They're not ranked anymore. Obviously, Virginia Tech, they play, who lost to Vandy. I mean, those are their hardest games. This might be an easy 12-0 schedule for Miami. And if that happens, they're easily a playoff team. And I think they're legit. Like, Cam Ward, I think, makes them legit. Having an elite quarterback like that just changes everything for a team. I think they're definitely getting to the ACC championship. I don't think there's any way they miss out on that. It'll be interesting to see, though, because if they do drop one game and then also lost the ACC championship, you could definitely make the case their resume is really not that good. They should not be in. But I think, obviously, if they win the ACC, they're in. But even if they just have one loss, let's say they're undefeated going to the ACC championship and they lose that game, I think they're in. 2 losses with no ACC championship, you know, at that point, the resume kind of blows. So we'll see. But, I mean, like I said, just extremely easy schedule for Miami. An absurdly hard schedule for Florida. It's going to be a tough one for Florida. Should be a great season for Miami. The last big game I want to talk about here is the Penn State at West Virginia game. Penn State won this game 34-12. A lot of people were picking the Mountaineers in this game, and I'm not surprised. They won 9 games last year, returned a lot of talent, and it was a home game, obviously, for them. But Penn State honestly dominated this game. Was it like an absolute blowout? No, but they looked very good. Drew Aller looked very poised in the pocket, didn't really make any mistakes. Singleton was running wild, 8.8 yards per carry. They stuffed West Virginia's run game. CJ Donaldson only had 42 yards. They only had 2.3 yards per carry on that game. I think it's very possible this West Virginia team wins 9 games again, maybe even 10 games. They are a very solid team. And I think Penn State just showed how good they are. I mean, they've consistently been like a top 10 team the past few years. They just can't beat Michigan or Ohio State. Their schedule is extremely manageable. They only have 2 ranked opponents left on the schedule. Number 13, USC, that's a road game. That'll be tough, obviously. And then they host Ohio State. If they can split one of those games, they're easily in the playoff, assuming they don't slip up somewhere else. Even if they go 10-2 with those 2 losses, I think they have a shot to get in the playoff as well, depending how they look in those other games. And I think Penn State is a legit playoff contender. When you look at the conferences as a whole, the SEC in those big matchups went 1-3. A&M lost, LSU lost, and Florida lost. And then obviously Georgia smacked up Clemson. Now I will add Vandy to this list though, because massive win for Vanderbilt beating Virginia Tech. A lot of people were thinking Virginia Tech should have been ranked to start the year. I even saw some people picking them to win the ACC outright. So obviously a massive, massive win for Vandy. So you can kind of say the SEC went 2-3 in those big matchups against other power teams. But after that, the rest of the SEC looked pretty good. South Carolina struggled, but Ole Miss looked good. Alabama looked really good under new coach DeBoer. Texas looked good. Tennessee looked really good as well. Obviously, 5-star quarterback Nico. I don't even know how to say his last name, but he balled out. Tennessee's looking kind of legit this year. Obviously, he was against, an FCS team. But that'll be a team to watch out for. And then when you go over to the Big Ten, they only had one conference team lose, and that was Minnesota. They lost to North Carolina, and they should have won that game. They had a potential game-winning field goal that they missed. But despite only having that one loss in the conference, I don't think they looked that impressive. They obviously had some big wins with USC and Penn State, but a lot of these other teams struggled. Michigan was in a 6-point game with Fresno State with, I think, about 6 minutes to go. The score does not look nearly as bad as that game was. The score is 30-10 final, but I think it was 16-10 with about 6 minutes to go. Oregon, I believe, was tied with Idaho in the fourth quarter, which is just that hurts my brain even thinking about it. That literally, if Idaho had somehow pulled that off, that would have been potentially the biggest upset ever. Oregon ends up squeaking that one out 24-14. Not a great look for Oregon. However, if you look at the yardage differential, Oregon outgained Idaho by 1 billion yards. I didn't get to watch that game that much, so I'm not entirely sure what happened there. So it might have been a little bit of a fluke. Ohio State started out really slow. They ended up, smacking up Akron 52-6, but another team that didn't look that great at the beginning. Iowa, they ended up smacking Illinois State and FCS school 40-0, but it was 6-0 at half. Very typical Iowa team there. Northwestern barely beat Miami, Ohio. UCLA barely beat Hawaii. So the point I'm making is, while the SEC didn't look great in some of their big marquee matchups, I think they handled business in some of those smaller matchups, whereas the Big Ten had an overall good record, but they struggled in several games, which was interesting. Nebraska looks good, though. Dylan Raiola, he will be fun to watch. Nebraska takes on Colorado next week. That's going to be a fun one. The Big 12 didn't have anything really too crazy going for them. Utah, I think, is the best team in that conference. TCU did get a big win over Stanford. Arizona State got a big win over Wyoming. That was a little surprising, especially the fact that they blew them 48-7. Great win there for ASU. But then you had some teams struggle. Texas Tech almost lost to Abilene Christian. Houston lost to UNLV by 20. Now, UNLV was favored in that game, I believe, but still you would hope that at home Houston would perform a little better than that. Arizona, very strange game. They gave up 39 points to New Mexico, but they won 61-39. Defeated threw for 422 yards, 4 touchdowns. McMillan had 304 receiving yards, and all 4 of those touchdowns were to him. They are going to be a scary team, especially offensively. Obviously, giving up 39 points to New Mexico is not good, but I think they have a legit chance to win the Big 12. Like I said, Utah's my favorite, but Arizona is definitely up there. Looking at the ACC, Georgia Tech advanced to 2-0 after beating Georgia State. SMU, after looking a little disappointing against Nevada last week, beat Houston Christian 59-7. And Nevada actually beat Troy this week, so the SMU win does not look nearly as bad now. NC State struggled a little bit with Western Carolina. They take on Tennessee next week. I will actually be attending that game. I think Tennessee wins that game big. North Carolina, big win though. We talked about that a little bit a second ago, beating Minnesota. Stanford played TCU really tight. I think that was encouraging for Stanford, but you would have loved to see them, if you're a Stanford fan, get that win at home. Syracuse is a little interesting. Gave up 22 points to Ohio, won 38-22. Kyle McCord balled out, 354 yards, 4 touchdowns. I had a little debate with some people that Kyle McCord is better than Drew Aller. I stand by that. Obviously, he's surrounded by not nearly as good of a team now at Syracuse, so it'll be a little hard to compare. But, I mean, in my opinion, Kyle McCord got a little too much hate at Ohio State. Was he the quarterback that was going to get them a national championship? Probably not. But is he garbage? No. It gives me a little bit of Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams vibes, when obviously Spencer Rattler got benched in favor of Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams balled out. But Spencer Rattler was still a solid quarterback. That's kind of the way I see it as well. Kyle McCord's still a solid quarterback. He's going to put up pretty good numbers at Syracuse. It'll be interesting to see what they do. And then the last thing I want to talk about is Florida State drops to 0-2 after losing to Boston College. Obviously, great win for Bill O'Brien and the Eagles, but Florida State is now 0-2. They are basically, I mean, that's 2 ACC losses already. You're out of the ACC race probably unless you win out. You're definitely out of the playoff race. You would literally have to win out and probably win the conference at this point. DJU might get benched, but it's not just him. I want to defend him slightly. He has not played well at all, but the receivers are dropping balls. The O-line is not blocking that well. The run game is non-existent. It's horrendous. The defense has looked better than the offense for sure, but even then, they have failed to get some clutch stops. Like this past game against Boston College, Florida State brought it to within 1 score, and then immediately they gave up a score to Boston College to make it 2 scores again. They still have to play Clemson, they have to play Miami, they have to play Notre Dame. I would say those are all guaranteed losses, so now you're looking at 5 losses. They have to take on Memphis next week. That might be a loss. You play SMU, they play North Carolina, they play Florida, which is probably going to be the toilet bowl. I mean, legitimately you might only get 4, 5, maybe get a bowl game. We will see. Maybe they're going to improve and start winning some games. I imagine they'll improve a little bit. But obviously the playoff is way out of the picture. Even the ACC championship's out of the picture. This Florida State team is quite frankly not good. Now, I will say Georgia Tech is now in the rankings, which is great to see. However, I think Boston College should be ranked over them. Boston College is not ranked. They beat Florida State by more than Georgia Tech did, and they did it on the road, whereas the Georgia Tech Florida State game was obviously in Ireland at a neutral site. Boston College played in Tallahassee and won by 15. It'll be interesting to see where Mike Norvell goes with this Florida State team, but their season's definitely cooked. And that's basically it for this week 1 recap. Dude, college football is so back. It's a lot of fun. I think my top 4 teams right now are Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Bama. All 4 of those teams look pretty good. A little bit of slow starts for some of them, but overall just good, solid teams there. Oregon drops out of my top 4 for sure. I think Ole Miss and like Notre Dame are probably some of the next 2. But we'll see what happens this year. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll hopefully have another recap for week 2. If you're enjoying this content, definitely subscribe here. Follow me on Instagram at BringNCAA Follow me on Twitter at TubbyLight. I'm going to try to do these recaps weekly. We're still going to have the regular College Football 25 content. Hopefully we'll have a video out tomorrow for that as well. I'll see y'all then.